and putting it into practice for our fellow CSUSB students every single day, which is kind of cool. So welcome to Rebus. Super happy to have you here. You know, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about ableism.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for the introduction. That was really sweet of you. So yeah, before I get into this, I have like a million screens I want to show you guys. Let's see what I want to do first. Let me do both. I think it's easier if I do both. So we're gonna start with this photo. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this photo. It's the day in the court for Americans with Disability protesting the planned over Supreme Court ADA ruling. So this happened in March 1990, and this actually plays a huge role within disabilities. Do you guys see it, by the way? How about now? Do you guys see it now? Can you guys hear me? I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Actually, give me 1 second.
Rebus, give me 1 second. I think I have like an audio adventure on my side. So we could when you shared, we could see it. You're not sharing right now.
Not now. Yeah.
Right. But my audio is coming from the device instead of like into the classroom, which is not super great. So we want to address that if we can. I'm going to unshare and then reshare. Because the music was coming into the classroom, but then this isn't. Maybe it's a Zoom thing.
Not a clue. You guys, so it's only through your laptop?
Yeah, it's only coming from my laptop. MacBook Pro. Okay, yep. Hang on.
The speakers above it.
Yeah. Yep.
You changed your mic.
Just kidding. Hi, welcome. Rebus, will you say something?
Can you hear me?
Better? Yay! So okay. Now you're like super loud. Hang on. better is relative. Okay. How are we? Will you say something else?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. Am I not scaring anyone?
Not currently.
That's the goal. Before I give you guys a bunch of information, I'll try my best not to. Okay. Let me go ahead and reshare it. Now I'm going to do it on this end. If it wants to, there we go.
Yep.
We're going to start with this photo. I think it's going to go in correlation of what I'm going to talk about today. So this is, I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this photo. It was the protest of planned over supremacy courts of the ADA ruling. This happened in March of 1990. This honestly correlates to academia ableism overall. But before we get into that academic ableism, I really want to go over a few vocab words, I would say, that might assist you guys within understanding ableism within disabilities overall. So I'm going to actually show you guys a little bit of my thesis and what definitions I have and the reasons that I have them. So I have accommodation biases within my my thesis, because it talks about disability discrimination when the abled community views physical disability as less in control of the situations than a non-physical disabled. So this is going to connect with academic ableism in a bit, but essentially accommodation biases have to do within higher education, or in education overall. And it basically states within this definition how every disability is viewed differently. And sometimes some are viewed less than or less of. Inclusion phobia. This one was really interesting to me. This has the fear of the unknown within disabilities, creating a psychological and irrational fear of stereotypes. So
will you make that page a little bit bigger so that way we can see?
Probably like everywhere. Better?
Yeah, but like the actual text.
Oh, the text. Yeah.
Yeah, like the zoom
Like
in.
that?
Yeah.
Better? Okay, cool. Sorry, I have like a mess in the background. I'm trying to save you guys from, okay, it's on the other side. Cool. Is that better? Like in the middle?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a mess in the background. This is my work laptop, unfortunately, but my actual laptop is even worse. Okay. So inclusion phobia, it's the fear of the unknown with a disability. So there's a psychological and irrational fear of stereotypes. This can also fall under, once again, we're going to talk about academic ableism and how this plays a huge role within it. Redefinition, this happens when people who are disabled are critiqued or through the stereotypes of being disabled, and then they create a new way for one to be perceived. I also have ethnocentric, I cannot speak today, I'm sorry, ethnocentric bias, which basically states that non-disabled oriented research ignores the perspective of people with disabilities. And then there's this concept of masking, which is when a disabled person begins to redefine themselves. So this goes in hand with redefinition. A way to redefine themselves is through masking. And then the last but not least, the one we're talking about today is ableism. What is ableism? So ableism is a tool of white supremacy that ungrids, depends on, and refines every other oppression. When I heard or talked or listened, let me actually stop sharing because I'm going to get distracted myself. When I first heard about ableism, I learned about it in critical race theory. So this is a different theory, but essentially it has to go hand in hand with the concept of white supremacy and how people of color were viewed less of. So looking at that or keeping that concept in mind, when I went into academic ableism in regards to disability, there was a similarity that I noticed within the research, which essentially is people with disabilities have these perceptions or misconceptions of themselves that create these barriers. And these barriers created academic ableism. And within my research, I kind of talk about looking back at the stairs photo, one of the authors that I'm going to actually bring up right now as well. I'm just sharing my screen 24/7. How do I move this? Sorry, guys, I'm not tech savvy and I'm learning that very quickly.
I'm going to blab about the photo for a second while you're pulling it up.
Can go for that.
The photo that Rivas put up is really important, and it's a really important part of advocacy history. And it can't be stressed, enough, because what you were seeing in that picture is a time before the Supreme Court had a ramp. In 1990, the Supreme Court did not have a ramp. And so people that needed a ramp to get to the Supreme Court, they threw themselves out of their chairs and dragged themselves up the steps in protest to illustrate how absurd it was that the Supreme Court did not have a ramp and what their needs were, and that their needs need to be invested in, because justice was not for them if they couldn't get into the building. Mm-hmm. And so, even when I look at this photo, because it's black and white, I'm like, when I first saw it, right? And I learned about this from my friend who we did the bowling and the swimming long ago, right? I've known him for like 15 years. And the first time I saw this photo, I thought it was like from the 70s or something, from the 60s, maybe. It was from the 90s. The civil rights of the populations that we're working to serve in this class, the timeline is so short that there wasn't a ramp. Now, did they get a ramp from doing this? Yeah, they did, and the ADA got signed and. But a really huge part of it was being a self-advocate in a pretty extreme way, just to make a really important point that justice and access to everything was, they didn't, the folks in this picture, they didn't feel like that justice was for them yet, but they were hopeful that through self-advocacy that it could be for them too. All right, I'll shut up now, Rivas.
No, you're good. I was even amazed. I always like listening about that. Okay, so going back to this photo, I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, but it has the same concept essentially. So Dolmage is an author and a researcher as well, but in 2017, he depicted ableism within education as this concept of steep steps. And the illustration essentially was kind of just like this one, where it was an architectural structure that had compromised of like towering pillars and narrow steps leading to the library. And essentially within that, he would state, like, if one were to say, hey, we need to create this to be more accessible, the university can go back and state, well, this is more common, it's more aesthetically pleasing, it's meant to do just that. And that's that concept or that thought process actually continues within education. And it's kind of just viewed as just that within disabilities and accommodations as well. So I really took into heart with that thought process because I myself am an individual with a disability. At the age of 7, I was diagnosed with short-term memory, ADHD, and really bad anxiety, essentially. And those kind of created me to have these issues, these barriers from academic ableism to occur. And when I was young and when I learned that I had a disability, in the office with my mom, a teacher actually told my mom, good luck with her in getting an education, because they were so tired of me, of being too hyper, being talkative, not listening, never paying attention, drawing instead of taking a test, which in my defense, my art was beautiful. They just didn't know that yet. But yeah, I grew up in a time where the concept of being disabled was viewed extremely negatively. And there were so many stereotypes that affected me to continue my academia career. For one, within academia itself, I was put into an ESL class, even though my English was perfect. And that was just the concept of I'm Hispanic and I have a disability. That just makes sense. That made sense for them, which limited my ability to learn at a fast rate, essentially. I was in a resource class where I was supposed to go by myself and remember the times when I didn't even know how to read a clock, because that was something that was really hard for me to grasp. So I never went to get the assistance I quote unquote needed. And these are things that my mom didn't even know. She thought, hey, education is helping her, she's doing great. And in reality, there was this back end where I wasn't speaking up. I was 7 years old and I was still learning the process myself, which kind of goes into this concept of academic ableism as well. And they're saying like, hey, we want to create accessibility, but to an extent, essentially. Which ended up being a huge issue for me growing up. I was not the best at academics. You can ask my mom. I was a solid C+ student. And my concept C's get degrees was really strong. But within understanding what academia ableism is, what accessibility is, along with these barriers, I learned to understand that it wasn't just me, because growing up, a lot of it entailed of people telling me, oh, it's just you. You just need to try harder. Oh, you just need to actually study. You need to sit down. And I did everything from anything you could think of. I mean, for crying out, I did cross country for 6 years to calm myself down. Nobody does that sport for fun. And if you do, God bless you. But me personally, I was like, I need something that'll calm me down. And that was my thought process at that time. So it created these barriers and these concepts. And it wasn't until community college where I had to accept that I had a disability, because I struggled in community college. And I had to go to a counselor and explain to him, here's my paperwork. I don't know what to do anymore. And that is the first concept of self-advocacy I had. It wasn't until I was 19 at that point. So from 19 and prior, I was struggling. And coming from first gen parents, there's another barrier right there itself. But yeah, I ended up going to a counselor that taught me this whole grand scheme of education about disabilities. And he was so nice, and he would actually talk everything down to me and explain everything that made me feel comfortable. And that's essentially where my passion for these classes started. And then I took intercultural communication, and that class itself opened up a new aspect of disabilities. It was the first time I've read about disabilities and I felt seen. But within that book itself, it stated that a lot of people who are abled are speaking for those who are disabled. And this kind of correlates to going back to academia ableism. Those who are disabled have a fear of speaking up due to stigmas, due to these barriers, and also due to those who are able to speaking up for them and creating these misperceptions and these misinterpretations. But yeah, so I ended up taking a lot of courses and started falling deeper into academia ableism and wanting to speak up for my community. And I continued my education essentially, which got me into my master's program. And I had to self-advocate within the master's program to even do my research. And I had to self-advocate to have Dr. Naren as my chair as well, because everyone that I brought up the concept, it was unfamiliar for them, and they had a fear of the topic because it's very sensitive for those who don't know. So that itself shows within academia, there's limited research that causes fear of even speaking about this. And there's also this like blind spot as well within education of talking about this, which creates this whole concept of the stairs to come back into academia. Essentially, we're continuing to have to crawl up these stairs with our education, with creating our own research for our community and trying to find, just like that time in 1990, we're trying to also create these works of our own with our voices in it to create equality within education. Because even within education, there's still a lot to go through and to break through to create that equal opportunity for all. But yeah, essentially that's academia ableism. I would love to hear from you guys and what you guys think about this concept itself as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this sharing.
Revis, that was awesome. Thank you. I'm going to check the chat too, just in case there's any comments there. And then I'll turn things around so you can see all of the amazing folks that you just shared with. Thank you. And yeah, questions are good. I mean, as you can tell, Revis is like super open, and sometimes it can be, you know, and I really appreciate what I'm gonna unpin. Oh, actually, I'm gonna leave you. So this is my class.
Hello.
I really appreciate what she's saying about, you know, that if we identify as non-disabled, like such as myself, right, then the most that we can do is really help hold space for folks that may not currently have a space, right? And the most we can do is uplift their voices and their perspective and their wants and their needs, because what I think that a neurodiversity center should be is actually not relevant. If I'm not neurodiverse, my thoughts about what that should be is not even 1% helpful, right? But I can make a listening session. I can find out like who the voices are in the room, and I can help make sure that they have a space to share that, because exactly what Rita said, right? That there's folks on our campus across the lives of so many different identities where they've experienced that experience of, you know, being told to be quieter or shrink away or all these different things, right? I mean, there's so much of that in community college, even in the research, right? It's like, oh, well, you know, I guess you could try to go to a 4-year maybe. And so all of you kind of push back against like some of that to some degree, right? Because you're here and we're all here together. But you know, despite the fact that our world has done provided that messaging to folks who are neurodiverse, like what might happen if we hold space for them anyways in the face of that messaging, right? And that's going to be one of the really cool things about Wednesday. So, questions for Rita?
How old were you, or not how old were you when you were 7, but what year were you in school, or just to get a time frame of what education was like? Was it like,
You know what? Year's a great question. All I could say is I'm 27 now. So if you could do the math, I'm a comm major. I should also state that and just let you know now, math is not my strong suit. I am a qualitative research for a reason. But I will say, I got held back in 2nd grade because of this whole situation and it was an ongoing, I've had a crazy elementary school situation as well. Not only did I get hailed back, I also had an issue with another teacher in 4th grade that couldn't stand me. And I was, once again, ADHD at a young age. You just look around, you're looking at the birds outside, you're trying to understand if it has subtitles. And I was doing that at that age. And unfortunately, it was during the, what's it called? The flag when I pledge allegiance, the Pledge of Allegiance. There we go. But it was during that time. And I made a professor or a teacher so upset that she spanked me. It's pretty crazy. Growing up for me was really hard with the disability. I hated elementary school for that reason. And this is at a young age when the concept of academic ableism, barriers, none of that makes sense to you at that age. You're barely grasping the concept of what 1 + 1 is. Or maybe for me at 2nd grade, that's what it was. I was a little behind, I'm not gonna lie, but I'll eventually get there. But yeah, it's really hard going through K through 12 with a disability. With these situations, I masked it. I went from being in a disabled, like an extra, the extracurricular, like your 7th period at that time. I forced myself to get out to go to Avid, which is me masking the concept of a disability. And the only reason why I did that was because my friends were asking me, what's your 7th period? What's your extra credit class? And I didn't want to tell them I'm in special ed, because that concept was really hard to even gulp down with everything that I dealt with in elementary school. And even in high school, like I said, I was like, I'm going to do cross country because it's going to calm me down, because it's going to tire me out. And it's going to force me to be strict on myself, which it did. It did great for me. But also, when I was done with cross country, that's when I was like, okay, that's not my solution 24/7. So it's like accepting your identity. It's a hard pill to swallow when you've gone through so much in life, which essentially is kind of why I'm doing the job I'm here now, because I know students have a similar story to me, a harder story, even worse than me, but I want to be there to be their supporting hand. And I'm going to do that through my work, through my writing, and through action here at SSD.
That's awesome. And to top it all off, you were an advocate for your brother as well, right?
That's true. My brother also had an issue. He had a speech impediment. So growing up, my ADHD played a great role because I had no problem speaking up. But my brother did. So when I was 3, I went to preschool with him because he wouldn't speak to anyone but me. So I was always around those with disabilities at a young age because my brother went to a preschool for people with disabilities. So I met a wide variety of what disabilities were at a young age. So going into elementary school for me, it was weird. I was like, they're too loud. Why are they going crazy? What's going on? I couldn't even comprehend it at a young age. And that was prior to me even being diagnosed. How did I go through kindergarten? I don't know. That's still unknown.
What you're saying reminds me of this idea of how much we really socially construct about our worlds, your lived experience was unique in that you were a family advocate and a self-advocate before you even knew it. And then you were in a space with predominantly non-disabled folks. You're like, this is unique for me.
Yeah.
Who are all these people? What are they doing?
Really hard to see that. Like growing up, I saw a person with Tourette's get bullied, and she stopped coming to school because they bullied her so much to the point where she just couldn't show up anymore. And that was also at a young age. So all this is happening in elementary school. It makes a fear, it distills a fear in you with the perception of this is what people see me as. And that's kind of the concept that I still hear in higher education as well. Like sitting down with students, that you hear that same perception of, well, this is what people view me as. I don't want to be seen as disabled at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and that stigma is a huge reason why there is so much confidentiality at SSD, is because there, you know, that's part of holding SD. I mean, it's part of HIPAA and laws and regulations, but it's also like folks won't come to us if they don't think that we'll keep their information that confidential because the stigma is so bad. That's a good question though. Yeah, right. Like, was this?
Yeah,
You know,
it's just crazy to see, even in 2000, how poor the education system has been to those who the neurodivergent, or those, I mean, those, the disabled, I guess.
I mean, there's stigma and lack of understanding
Yeah.
across both populations, right? And that's intersectional. Yeah, there's a lot there, and then because what Rita is talking about is that she was in a lot of general ed classrooms too, right? And I hear a metaphor that like led some of my work when I was director over at SSD as an interim, because she would say about like the resources were there, but I needed resources to get to the resources. Like, and I would always think about, you know, we worked across the desk from each other. She was my grad assistant while I was there. And I would think about that story and go, okay, how can we resource people to get to the resources? You know, because the resources, I'm gonna get her and then you, yeah. Because the resources aren't useful if you don't get to them. And sometimes there's steps just to get there. Oh, we've got other questions in the room, Rita. Are you good to?
I'm good, yeah.
I guess it's not really like a direct question. I'm just curious of like what both of you would think about this idea, because it kind of goes along the same Sharon, is like the school system, but I was homeschooled my entire life, and I know a lot of people who had students who experienced things like that, where the environment wasn't like, they weren't getting one-on-one attention, they weren't getting the things that they needed. Like I had friends, family friends who pulled their kids out of school and just like felt that they could do a better job. So like, what are your guys' thoughts on that concept? And like, I guess I'm just realizing now like that would be a form of self-advocacy maybe, because like the parents are basically saying like, we're gonna advocate for a child's education because you're not doing the proper things, or like treating them with the attention that they need. Or is it like more self-advocacy to like push against the school system and like demand for those things to happen?
I'll go first, Rita, you go second. I would say that the fastest answer is it depends on the money and resources that you have, right? So there's specific laws pertaining to disability in K-12 that don't apply here. And they say that every disabled student has a right to an individualized education. So on the books, yeah, people like my son, folks like Rita, like they should get anything and everything like that money and resources can acquire, right? Now, does it happen without advocacy and good luck and good schools and out there in the wild? No, right? And so for me, like I was a really broke single parent, I had to fight against, because I couldn't self-fund and I couldn't stay home, right? Yeah. I have a friend who has a kid with autism who's an adult now, and the dad is the co-executive producer of The Simpsons. So he's got Simpsons money. So they went to a really awesome autism private school, right? Yeah. So if you have Simpsons money, you have different options than if you have Narrative money. But the place where money is actually not an object, but the advocacy levels is actually public school. Because the laws only protect you there. Like if you go into charter, if you go into private, if you like exit the public school system, there actually are no laws that protect you. And like a lot of those settings, they'll actually kick you out. Like I wanted my son to go to Montessori, and Montessori was like, yeah, no, he needs to go to public school because there's just way too much. And this is like a common thing, right? They're like, there's way too much happening. We can't accommodate at this level. So, the laws are there only in public school. But a ton of families do other things, sometimes because they don't know the advocacy route. They might not, be that weirdo who reads law late at night like me, right? So lots of people do it different ways. And that is one of the ways, absolutely.
I was going to pivot similar to that. I think the concept of intersectionality really plays a huge role within disabilities and academia. Like I said, I come from first gen parents who are limited in English, especially at the time where I was getting diagnosed. My mom was very limited with her English at that time. So thankfully she had a best friend who's like my second mom, and she's the one who was like, we got one diagnosis and somebody was like, she's fine. She's just a bad child. That was the first like actual like process I went through where they're like, no, you're just a bad child. And my mom was like, that's not true. And it wasn't until thankfully we had that resource of her friend who's a psychologist being like, no, she has a disability. She needs to go through a different counselor if they can't find it. So at the end of the day, there's a huge thought process. My mom didn't know anything about law, like Naren said. Like, it's really hard if you have the like information in your hands. It's easier to go through a process, but there's no one way to pivot. Essentially, it's for my like childhood. My mom was the one who was trying to self-advocate for me with the limited information she had, and she did her best.
We had a question from Dee Dee.
I was gonna ask, and it was also kind of along lines we were talking about finances, so with the UC system increasing like tuition and everything, how does that affect student with disabilities? Because there's only limited resources and money that goes towards the space for them to actually function. So how does that work? Because those of us that can like protest and say, hey, we don't want a tuition raise, how does the student?
Right, like, are we accidentally protesting against including disabled
Yeah,
students
it's like,
without realizing it?
exactly, like there's all shifts that's happening, especially for finances. I know with myself, like I literally have 3 jobs. So it's like with the disabled student and parents that don't have that extra money or income, like how's it gonna affect you?
Whose pocket does it come out of?
Yeah.
So I love this question. This is a really good one because this would come up in K-12 too. I'd be like, well, we don't have the resources. Like the state actually pays you, right? So it's like you make money off my kid. Like, I think you want to make money off of doing something right anyways, right? But you're gonna make money off of it. So the reimbursement process is and the same here, right? The reimbursement like comes from like beyond, like any kind of like disability related student services, they come from essentially like a limitless well of money from like the chancellor's office and the state and like beyond. Because they're like, if someone needs a deaf interpreter today, they need a deaf interpreter today.
Yeah.
Like we can't start, it takes like a year to get funding on something. We cannot take a year, right? It's a state institution. We're slow.
Yeah.
Rivas, how long was your hiring process or even to get hired as a grad, even when she became a grad assistant, it took like a month. For her to actually like get hired in like a career job was it was like 4 months, right? It took forever.
Took a minute.
Yeah. So we can't do that with something that someone needs today. And so the only way to do that is like these resources they're completely different resources. Now other places they're actually working on things like tuition, like you said, the UCs at first. So looking at that, your tuition in the UCs doesn't change the entire time you're there. Whatever you start at, the people like the next year, they might start higher, but you stay the same. And I think Cal State's kind of transitioned to that too, where it's like, it'll be more expensive maybe for the next person, but you're not the next person. You'll stay the same. Yeah, how those resources get sourced doesn't necessarily touch that kind of stuff, right? It comes from like a completely different pocket of the institution. Yeah, and it's way cheaper than not doing it. By a lot. Rivas?
So when it comes to that, I'm not 100% sure. So I'm so glad Naren answered that. But I can speak through SSD and what we're trying to do to assist our students itself. That's kind of a conversation we had recently about, well, how can we help our students with finances? It's really hard. We can't really assist them with finances itself unless they go through DOR. That's one option for them that we have. And then going through
Pays tuition and books.
Mhm. Yeah, DOR does that. And then essentially we created a scholarship page for them, and we're slowly going to start doing more research to add there for them. But that's how we're trying to go off on our end, is essentially working with DOR through SSD and Wave, and then also trying to get those scholarship pages accessible for them to kind of just review and like apply. And then there's also, we understand the barriers of like the process of application can be even long and also hard. So what are we doing? And that's kind of where my job comes in as an A to Z. I would have them schedule an appointment with me, and I would sit with them. If it took 1 hour, 2 hours, if I have that time, I'm going to give them that time to go through the whole process to make sure they apply. So that's how we're doing it through SSD. We're trying to provide the scholarships, and if they need that extra helping hand, that's why I'm here for.
Thank you.
I'm defining terms on the board as you talk. Do other questions? Yeah, we've got a question in the back.
I just kind of wanted to get an idea of what you would want out of a neurodiversity center. Like, what kind of things would you like to see, like resources?
That is a great question. Although I fall under that category, I would say I don't have the right voice for that. But I will say I do have a student assistant who falls under that. And we kind of went through, which I was going to talk to you about later, Naren, but we went through this process of what would you like to see in a center for you? And something that we went through was we went through different areas of Cal State San Bernardino. What makes it comfortable? What makes it not comfortable? One huge thing for him was I need borders. I need to be able to concentrate, because if not, I'm going to be talking to the person across from me. I need someone there because if I need help, I need someone to talk to that's going to understand me. I need a scent because for him, it was kind of like we went through what is it called? I'm blanking out on the name right now.
The retreat.
I'm sorry?
The retreat.
Yes, the retreat. I was like, starts with an R. We went through the retreat and I had him sit there and explain to me, what do you like? What sensories do you like? And his thing was like, I love the aroma. And then we went to my office, and I have like a little scented plug for the same reason. I like a smell because it calms me down. And he's like, I need that there. And he's like, and I want photos of like animals because that's going to make me feel calm and comfortable. I don't want to see a poster about studying. And these are some things to like keep in mind, like as well. And he's like, I need a quiet place, because we went to Starbucks, because he's like, I want a coffee. And we went in there. I was like, could you study here? And he was like, no, this is horrible. It's bad lighting. It's too loud. I'm going to look at everything. And same thing for me with ADHD. I hear an espresso machine going off. I'm going to stare at that because I used to work at Starbucks, and I'm like, I want to go back there and make a drink now. That's my actual thought process. If you guys ever come to my actual office, this is off topic, but if you guys ever want to come down here, I have like a little coffee station in my own office for that reason. But yeah, like I get easily distracted, and that's something that we had a commonality. And he's like, I need it to be bright. I need it to have accessibility, maybe a computer, so I don't have to go somewhere else. And these are all things to keep in mind and like to keep into consideration when making these, because these are something ideas I didn't even think of. I just thought a table, a computer, lighting were good. And he's like, no, there's more to it. So my advice, even maybe interviewing someone within that community, being like, what would you like to see? Because I can create something, but it doesn't mean it's going to depict whatever they would like.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not a question, but a comment. Because she mentioned that her student assistant needed good lighting,
Yeah,
but maybe some students need like dimmer lights.
right, like what equals good lighting, right? And some of that might be, so I'll give you an example of that. So when we did bowling, they can adjust everything in the bowling alley. They're one step away from being a sound stage, right? And so as we were holding the event, I went to my self-advocate friend and was like, hey, do you want to adjust anything in advance? He was like, no, I wanna like hear from the folks who are here and then adjust it to them. Well, of course, thank you for saying something so obvious, right? And so some of it might even be being ready with that variability. So, if a Dr. Chad is like, I like the lights, overhead lights like this off, and then a student assistant is like, I like the lights really bright, then if we could be ready with both, right? Because some of it, I feel, might be that sense of we're ready for what you need. Right, and if there's 10 people that walk in, what they might need might each be 10 wildly different things.
Yeah, so I was thinking that the light switches probably have those sliding, like you can go all the way brighter, you can dim it however much
Yeah.
you want or need to accommodate, or
Yeah.
even then, like, if they're just trying to relax in there, they can just dim it down.
Yeah.
And then just chill in a room to themselves, if that's what they need.
Yeah, I mean, facilities is a black box, that's another like 5-year process, but we can put something over the light, right?
That's the other thing that's like so interesting, because as I'm listening to you, like how you're saying to be ready with options and to like accommodate everybody's like feeling of being comfortable, like that's just a normal thing, like that's just something that you do for everyone. So it's like, why is it a topic of conversation when it's pertaining to this specific group of people that maybe has those needs more immediately or has those needs more frequently, because it's kind of, I mean, like, I also work at Starbucks, and it's like they're always talking about like every customer has a different thing. Like you said, 10 people, you'll see 10 people, and they all have like super different stories, super different drinks, like whatever. And so it's just interesting, like as you're talking, how it's like that's just something that we should do, just to, like that should be the base level, like.
Well, and this is why I love hanging out with the students, right? Because that mindset in this room, and that mindset sadly isn't everywhere.
Yeah.
I know for me as a family advocate, I would take Bryce, my son, to autism themed events because he was a person who would go into tantrum behaviors, like really aggressive, and he'd throw himself on the ground. He actually like literature, like stuff written about him where the assessment was throwing himself on ground with no sense for no personal regard for safety, right? Like this is how it would be written about clinically. And so he'd throw himself on the ground in the middle of the street, he would throw himself on the ground, and it would take like an hour to like scoop this up and regather ourselves, right? It would happen at school. And the thing that is what you're saying, like everyone should have a sense of belonging. Like we always treat everyone like they have a sense of belonging. I know that there were times where those behaviors were so alarming, and that people had never seen that before. And so we definitely did not have a sense of belonging, right? Because it was so outside of what people consider to be a norm. And they were hard moments, and they're made harder by that, right? Like when I see a family go and all these things are happening, I just go up to them and I go, hey, I'm an extra set of hands. I don't know if you need me or if you don't need me, but I'm an extra set of hands, and we accept you for exactly what's going on right now. And I've seen people just start crying. I've seen people like, yeah, can you grab me this thing? I can't get up right now because I'm like keeping this person from hitting their head on the ground, but I need my bag, which is 10 feet that way. Can you hand it to me? Right? I've seen all kinds of different reactions, but it's like there's like that different sense in those two things, because there's just things we're not used to seeing, but they still happen almost every day to someone in our immediate area.
Yeah, but even in that, it's like, how do people react when you see someone crying? It's like, why is that such a like hard thing to grasp?
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I love these questions, right? And I like these are things to reflect on throughout the term that are so important, because wouldn't it be nice if we didn't need to do this? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? But I think about, so I co-presented with Dr. Chad, and he's like very open about being a professor on campus with autism. And we gave a talk last Wednesday, and he was like, well, why do people tell kids to look away when they see someone in a wheelchair? Right? It's like we're all programmed with some of this, And it can be hard, you know, and it's hard as a recipient of, you know, going through a day where, you know, you hear someone be told to look away from you all day long, you know, so it's just kind of like what Rivas was talking about like the academic ableism, it's just kind of like woven in, you know. But Rivas, anything to add to that?
The only thing that came to my mind that might help make it make sense is working at Starbucks. I was a shift, and if you're a barista, let's say you're on cold bar and you see someone on drive bar and they're overwhelmed and they walk off, your thought process might be, well, I'm here, it's too busy, I can't go help this person right now, but that other person's going to go help them, which is hence the shift. So the shift's going to go over there and make sure they're okay. And I think that's the thought process that happens in education as well, where the student has a tantrum and the teacher might be like, well, I have X, Y, and Z on my plate, I'm not going to deal with them because SSD is going to handle them, or someone else will handle them because they have to, because somebody has the heart to do that and I don't have the time. And that's kind of where I'm thinking might be this where you're just like, it's common sense, it's humanity. Like, you want to go help them, you want to go talk to the customer, you want to go help this student, you want to be kind and make sure they're okay. But not everyone has that in them. Some people are unfortunately very selfish. Like I said, working at Starbucks, I've had baristas who are like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to go all in, I'm going to help this person, I'm going to be on cold bar and hot bar and help everyone I can. And there were those who were like, I can only do one thing and that's it, don't ask for more. And I think that's that concept that happens in education as well, where it's, I'm going to do this one thing and that's all I can handle because I'm doing research, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm already teaching like 100+ students a day. I can't have this one student be in my way. So that's essentially my thought process of why that could be a reasoning to that. And that's essentially why I'm doing my research as well, kind of trying to get those answers of, well, why are you limiting? Why are you creating these barriers? Because that's something that we don't know. And it could be a simple answer of, this is triggering for me, this is too much for me, I itself might have a disability. These are the questions that I'm trying to look for as well that create these barriers. Does that make sense? I'm so sorry if that didn't.
Yeah, no, definitely it did. I know we just have to get back to work soon. She's on her shift at SSD right now. She's talking to us from SSD, so thank you for that. Any last questions before she goes? Yeah, we got one over here.
What personally helped you with your disability as far as continuing with your learning in school?
I think it was the support I had from my counselor, and I owe it all to him. Until this day, I'm in contact with him actually at RCC. So that counselor made me feel seen and made me feel supported. It was the first time I felt like someone in education cared for me, which was very rare. Like K through 12, it was, you're a bad student, you're just a troublemaker. Oh, now you're an athlete, you're a slack off because you're an athlete. There was all these misperceptions of me. So when I went to the DRC over there is what it's called, I went there, sat with that counselor, and he kind of explained to me like, it's going to be okay. And that was the first time like I let it out and cried with him, being like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it was because of him that I stayed in education, because I met with him a lot, and it took me a while to even walk in there on my own, or to like be okay with walking in there itself. But it was because of him I continued education, and he became my comfort counselor essentially. And he, like, even after that, like I left, I would still be in contact with him at Cal State LA, because that's where I went for my bachelor's degree. And I would, even though I had a counselor there, I still relied on him. And after my bachelor's degree, I was like, what's next? And I went to him, of course. And it was just that support that I needed. But that also led me to being like, I want to be that support for others. So being understanding and being able to let people feel seen, I think, is what allowed me to continue my education and break those stereotypes. And it's also going through my research and being like, this is annoying me, this is making me upset, let me make a change, essentially. So I think that's what motivated me to do my thesis, because I've done a research paper on transient communities, and although I was involved in it and I created it and I finished it, it's not as passionate as I have for this topic.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Rivas. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. If you guys have any questions, you are more than welcome to come to my office. I'm here I have a weird schedule, but I'm here, okay? That's all you need to know. I'm here Monday through Friday. But yeah, if you guys have questions, email me, come to the office, come see my little coffee station. You guys are more than welcome to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'll put your email up on the board and everything too. So thank you, Revis. I appreciate you. You're the best as always. We'll talk to you
I'll see you
later.
guys Wednesday. I'll see you guys Wednesday.
All right, cool. Sounds good. Bye.
Bye.
So